The morning mist hung thick over the alien forest as Marcus Chin stepped carefully through the undergrowth. His boots made soft, crushing sounds against the purple moss that carpeted the ground between towering trees with silver bark and leaves that shimmered like metal in the filtered sunlight. He had been walking for 3 hours since dawn, following the faint energy readings on his scanner that suggested signs of life ahead. Marcus was part of the Terran Survey Corps, sent to catalog potentially habitable worlds in this sector of the galaxy. His team had landed on Verdania Prime 2 weeks ago, but a severe storm had separated him from the others. His communication equipment was damaged, and he had been making his way back to the landing site ever since. The planet seemed peaceful enough, with no signs of hostile wildlife or dangerous predators, but being alone on an alien world was never ideal. The scanner in his hand began beeping more rapidly. Something large was moving up ahead, beyond a cluster of massive tree roots that formed natural archways. Marcus slowed his pace and crouched behind a fallen log, peering through his binoculars. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. 3 small creatures, no bigger than Earth-house cats, were huddled together beneath an overhanging rock ledge. They had thick, golden fur marked with dark stripes, and their eyes were large and luminous, filled with what looked unmistakably like fear. The cubs made soft, whimpering sounds as they pressed against each other for warmth and comfort. But these weren't just any ordinary alien animals. Marcus recognized them from his pre-mission briefings. These were Kytherian cubs, offspring of one of the galaxy's most respected sentient species. The Kytherians were known throughout the galactic community as brilliant engineers and peaceful diplomats. Their homeworld was hundreds of light years from here. Marcus felt his heart sink as he observed the scene more carefully. The cubs were clearly lost and frightened. Their fur was matted and dirty, and they looked thin, as if they hadn't eaten in days. More troubling, there were no adult Kytherians anywhere in sight. How had these youngsters ended up alone on this remote planet? He activated his universal translator and slowly approached the cubs, keeping his movements gentle and non-threatening. As he drew closer, the smallest cub, barely the size of a kitten, looked up at him with wide, golden eyes. The translator crackled to life, picking up the high-pitched vocalizations. "Mama? Papa?" the tiny voice asked in heavily accented Standard Galactic. The other 2 cubs lifted their heads, hope flickering in their expressions before dimming when they realized Marcus wasn't one of their own kind. "Easy there, little ones," Marcus said softly, crouching down to their level. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Marcus. Can you tell me your names?" The largest of the 3 cubs, who appeared to be the eldest, stepped protectively in front of the others. "I am Zeph. These are my littermates, Nira and Pip." His voice was stronger, but still carried the tremor of fear. Are you the human the adults spoke of in frightened whispers?" Marcus was surprised. "Humans? What did they say about humans?" Zeph's ears flattened against his head. That humans are dangerous. That they fight wars and destroy things. That they are not to be trusted. But, even as he spoke, his voice wavered with uncertainty. "I see," Marcus said gently. "And what do you think? Do I seem dangerous to you?" The cubs exchanged glances. Little Pip, the smallest, peeked out from behind Zeph and shook her head slowly. You smell worried. Not angry. Not dangerous." Marcus smiled. Kytherians had an enhanced sense of smell that could detect emotional states through pheromones. It was one of their most remarkable abilities. "That's right, Pip. I am worried about you 3. How did you end up here? Where are your parents?" Zeph's composure cracked, and tears began to form in his large eyes. "There was a ship malfunction during our family's trading voyage. Emergency pods scattered across this system. Our pod landed here 3 days ago. The distress beacon isn't working, and we don't know where anyone else is." Nira, who had remained silent until now, spoke up in a voice barely above a whisper. "We're supposed to wait for rescue, but we ran out of food yesterday, and it gets so cold at night." Marcus felt a surge of protective instinct. These weren't just lost alien children. They were someone's babies, frightened and alone on a hostile world. Every parental instinct he possessed, honed by his own young daughter back on Earth, kicked into overdrive. "Well," he said, settling down cross-legged on the moss. It looks like we're going to be helping each other. I'm trying to get back to my own people too. Maybe we can work together." Zeph looked skeptical. "But why would you help us? We are different species. And, and we were taught that humans only help themselves." "Who taught you that?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Anti-human sentiment wasn't uncommon in some parts of the galaxy, particularly among species that had only heard second-hand stories about humanity's more violent past. "The Hegemony Council representatives who visit our world," Neera said. "They say humans are too aggressive to be trusted members of galactic society." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. The Hegemony was a coalition of older, established species that had dominated galactic politics for millennia. They had been less than welcoming when humanity had achieved faster-than-light travel and started exploring beyond their home system. "Well," Marcus said, "I suppose you'll have to judge for yourself whether those stories are true. Right now, though, I think we should focus on keeping you three safe and fed. Are you hungry?" All three cubs nodded eagerly. Marcus reached into his pack and pulled out several nutrition bars. They weren't exactly gourmet cuisine, but they were designed to provide balanced nutrition for a variety of biological systems. As the cubs ate, Marcus studied their situation more carefully. The rocky overhang they had sheltered under provided some protection from rain, but it would be inadequate against the dropping nighttime temperatures he had experienced during his journey. The cubs' natural fur would help, but they were clearly not adapted for this planet's climate. "Zeph," he said, "do you remember anything else about your ship's emergency protocols? Any backup plans your parents might have mentioned?" The young Kytherian's ears perked up slightly. "Papa said that if we ever got separated, we should try to reach high ground where rescue signals could travel farther. But," he looked around at the dense forest surrounding them, "everything here looks the same. We don't know which way to go." Marcus checked his scanner and topographical readings. According to his equipment, there was a significant ridge line about 15 kilometers to the north. It would be a difficult journey for the cubs, but it might indeed be their best chance of signaling for help or being spotted by search parties. "I have some good news," Marcus said. "My equipment shows there are hills not too far from here, but it'll take us a day or two to reach them, and we'll need to be prepared for the journey." Pip looked up from her nutrition bar with crumbs scattered across her whiskers. "You're really going to help us? Even though we're not human?" The innocent question hit Marcus harder than he expected. "Pip, where I come from, we have a saying. It takes a village to raise a child. That means everyone has a responsibility to help take care of children, no matter whose children they are." "Even alien children?" Zeph asked, his skepticism warring with hope. "Especially alien children who are far from home," Marcus replied firmly. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus began to assess what they would need for the journey ahead. The cubs were clearly exhausted and stressed, but they seemed to be regaining some energy now that they had food and weren't alone. Still, traveling through unknown terrain with three young aliens would require careful planning. Marcus spent the remaining daylight hours gathering materials from the surrounding forest. The silverbark trees had flexible inner wood that could be stripped into strong, rope-like fibers. The leaves, when properly prepared, could serve as natural insulation. There were also edible berries growing on low bushes, which his scanner confirmed were safe for Kytherian physiology. As evening approached and the temperature began to drop, Marcus knew they would need better shelter than the rocky overhang could provide. The cubs were already starting to shiver despite their fur, and Pip had developed a slight cough that worried him. "We need to build something warmer," he told the cubs as he examined the available materials. "Something that will keep the cold wind out and hold our body heat in." Zeph watched with growing curiosity as Marcus began selecting and arranging various pieces of bark, vine, and leafy branches. "What are you making?" "Shelter," Marcus said simply. "Something my grandfather taught me when I was about your age. We're going to weave together a nest that will keep you warm and safe tonight." As Marcus worked, using techniques passed down through generations of human survival knowledge, the cubs watched in fascination. None of them had ever seen anything like it. Their species, advanced as they were in technology and engineering, had long ago moved beyond the need for such primitive survival skills. But here was this human, using nothing but his hands and the materials nature provided, creating something that looked increasingly like it might actually work. How do you know how to do this? Nira asked, her voice filled with wonder. Humans have been building shelters for a very long time, Marcus explained as he carefully wove flexible branches together. Long before we had technology, we had to learn how to survive in all kinds of environments. Those skills get passed down from parents to children, even now when we don't always need them. The cubs exchanged glances. This was very different from what they had been taught about humans. This wasn't violence or aggression. This was care, patience, and an almost instinctive understanding of how to provide protection and comfort. As darkness fell completely, Marcus put the finishing touches on their shelter. It wasn't much to look at, just a dome-shaped structure woven from bark and branches, lined with soft leaves and moss, but it was warm and dry inside. The cubs crawled in gratefully, their shivers finally subsiding as the enclosed space trapped their shared body heat. "This is amazing," Pip whispered, curled up between her littermates. "It's like a nest, but better." Marcus settled in near the entrance, close enough to provide additional warmth, but positioned so he could keep watch over their surroundings. As the cubs finally relaxed enough to sleep, he found himself thinking about his own daughter, safe in her bed back on Earth, and about how any parent in the galaxy would want someone to help their children if they were lost and afraid. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. They still had a long journey ahead, and there was no guarantee that rescue would be waiting at the end of it. But tonight, 3 frightened cubs were warm and safe, and sometimes that was enough to start building hope. The next morning brought unexpected challenges. Marcus woke to find little Pip burning with fever, her breathing shallow and labored. The cough she had developed the previous evening had worsened during the night, and her golden fur was damp with perspiration. "Zeph, Nira," Marcus called softly, rousing the other cubs. "I need you to help me with Pip. She's sick." The 2 older cubs immediately pressed close to their littermate, their ears flat with worry. "What's wrong with her?" Nira asked, her voice tight with fear. Marcus ran his scanner over the tiny cub, but the readings were inconclusive. His medical training was basic at best, and he had no real knowledge of Kytherian physiology beyond what was in his general database. What he could tell was that Pip's body temperature was elevated, and her respiratory system was clearly struggling. It might be an infection, or maybe an allergic reaction to something in the environment, he said, trying to keep his voice calm despite his growing concern. "Either way, we need to get her somewhere with proper medical facilities." Zeph's eyes widened. "But the nearest Kytherian medical station is back on our homeworld, and we don't even know if there are any rescue ships looking for us." "Then we make our own rescue," Marcus said firmly. "My people should have a medical bay in their ship. If I can get us all back to my landing site, they can treat Pip properly." The problem was that Marcus's original plan to head north toward higher ground would add at least an extra day to their journey. With Pip in her current condition, he wasn't sure she could handle that kind of delay. But heading directly toward his landing site would mean crossing a river valley that his initial survey had marked as potentially dangerous terrain. As Marcus weighed their options, he noticed something else troubling. During the night, some kind of large creature had left tracks around their shelter. The prints were circular and deep, suggesting something heavy that moved on multiple limbs. Whatever had visited them hadn't tried to enter their makeshift home, but it had definitely been investigating. "We're not alone in these woods," Marcus told the cubs as he showed them the tracks. "Something big was checking us out last night." Nira's fur stood on end. "Are we in danger?" "I don't think so, at least not immediately. If it wanted to hurt us, it probably would have tried last night. But it's another reason why we need to get moving soon." Marcus made his decision. They would head directly toward his landing site, taking the more dangerous but faster route through the valley. Pip's condition was the priority now, and every hour they delayed could make things worse for her. The journey began badly. Pip was too weak to walk on her own, so Marcus fashioned a carrying sling from strips of bark and vine, allowing him to transport the sick cub while keeping his hands free. Zeph and Nira stayed close, their earlier wariness of him completely forgotten in their concern for their littermate. As they made their way through increasingly dense forest, Marcus found himself constantly adapting their path to account for obstacles the cubs couldn't easily navigate. Fallen logs became bridges he carefully guided them across. Steep slopes required him to lower the cubs down one by one while he found safer routes. Stream crossings meant carrying each cub to keep them dry. "Why do you work so hard for us?" Zeph asked during one of their rest stops. The young Kytherian was clearly exhausted, but he had been trying his best to keep up without complaining. "We are not your responsibility." Marcus paused in checking Pip's temperature before answering. "Do you know what the most important thing about humans is, Zeph?" The cub shook his head. "We're stubborn. When we decide something is important, we don't give up easily. And I've decided that getting you 3 homes safely is important." "But why?" Nira pressed. "The Hegemony Council says humans only care about power and conquest." Marcus looked at both cubs seriously. "Tell me, what do you think conquest means?" Zeph considered this. "Taking control of others? Making them do what you want." "That's one definition," Marcus agreed. "But here's what humans have learned over our history. The strongest societies aren't built by conquering others. They're built by protecting the vulnerable and helping those who need help. That's how you create real strength." As if to prove his point, Pip stirred in her sling and made a soft sound of distress. Marcus immediately adjusted her position and offered her water from his canteen, speaking to her in soothing tones until she settled back into fitful sleep. "You see," Marcus continued, "taking care of Pip doesn't make me weaker. It makes all of us stronger as a group." The cubs pondered this as they resumed walking. It was such a different perspective from what they had been taught about humans. Every action Marcus took seemed to contradict the stories they had heard. Around midday, they reached the edge of the river valley Marcus had been dreading. The slope down was steep and treacherous, covered with loose stones that could easily cause a dangerous fall. Worse, the river at the bottom was running higher and faster than his initial surveys had indicated, probably due to recent rains. "This looks scary," Nira said, peering over the edge. "It is scary," Marcus admitted. "But Pip needs help, and this is the fastest way to get it to her." What followed was one of the most challenging hours of Marcus's life. Using every climbing technique he knew, he slowly worked his way down the slope with Pip secure in her sling. Then, he climbed back up to help Zeph, and then, again for Nira. Each trip was a careful negotiation with gravity and loose rock, requiring absolute focus and precision. But the river crossing proved even more difficult. The current was strong enough to sweep a grown human off their feet, let alone small Kytherian cubs. Marcus studied the rushing water for long minutes, looking for any possible solution. "There," he said finally, pointing to a series of large boulders that formed stepping stones about halfway across. "If I can get over there, I can help you across one at a time." "That's too dangerous," Zeph protested. "What if you fall? Then you'll have to figure out how to take care of yourselves," Marcus said with a grin that was braver than he felt. "But I won't fall. Humans are very good at not falling when it matters." The crossing was harrowing. Marcus made it to the boulder in the middle of the river, but barely. The rock was slippery with spray, and the current tugged at his legs with surprising strength. Getting the cubs across required him to throw them a rope he had woven from vines. Then, carefully guide each one across the stepping stones while they held tight to his makeshift lifeline. Nira slipped halfway across and nearly fell into the rushing water, but Marcus caught her just in time, pulling her up onto the boulder with him. She clung to his jacket, trembling with cold and fear. "I've got you," he assured her. "You're safe." When they finally reached the far side of the river, all of them were soaked and exhausted. But they had made it across, and Marcus's scanner indicated they were now only a few hours from his landing site. As they rested and tried to warm up, Zeph looked at Marcus with something approaching awe. "You risked your life for us. Multiple times. That's what family does," Marcus said simply. "But we're not your family. We're not even your species." Marcus looked down at Pip, still sleeping restlessly in his arms. "There are different kinds of family, Zeph. Sometimes family is the people who happen to be with you when you need them most." The afternoon brought them to more familiar terrain. Marcus recognized landmarks from his earlier journey, and his scanner confirmed they were getting close to the Terran survey camp. But as they crested a low hill, Marcus saw something that made his heart sink. His landing site was not empty. 3 large ships had landed near his team's smaller survey vessel, and figures in dark armor were moving between them. Even at a distance, Marcus could see that these were not friendly visitors. The sleek, predatory design of the ships and the aggressive positioning around his team's craft told him everything he needed to know. Pirates, he muttered under his breath. Zeph's enhanced hearing caught the word. Pirates? Here, looks like it. They must have detected our ship's signal and come to investigate. Marcus quickly scanned the area with his binoculars, looking for any sign of his teammates. He saw several figures in Terran uniforms sitting under guard near one of the pirate vessels. They appeared to be unharmed, but clearly captured. What do we do now? Nira asked, sensing the tension in Marcus's posture. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, thinking hard. Pip was getting worse, not better. She needed medical attention soon, or her condition could become critical. His teammates were captured, but alive. The pirates appeared to be looting the survey ship's equipment and supplies. We're going to get on that ship, he said finally. Both cubs stared at him. The pirate ship? Zeph asked in disbelief. No, my people's ship. It has a medical bay that can help Pip, and from there we can try to contact proper authorities. But it won't be easy. Marcus spent the next hour carefully observing the pirates' routine. There were about a dozen of them, members of what looked like a mixed crew of different species. They seemed focused on stripping valuable equipment from the survey vessel, and they had posted only minimal guards around the perimeter. As evening approached, Marcus began to form a plan. It was risky, probably foolish, but it was the best option he could see for getting Pip the help she needed. Listen carefully, he told the cubs. Humans have another trait that other species sometimes don't understand. When we're protecting someone we care about, we can be very, very creative about solving problems. What are you going to do? Nira asked, though her tone suggested she wasn't sure she wanted to know. I'm going to show these pirates why the Hegemony Council might be right to be nervous about humans, Marcus said with a smile that was equal parts confident and slightly unhinged. But first, I need to make sure you three are somewhere safe. As darkness fell over the alien forest, Marcus began to put his plan into motion. It was time to show the galaxy what humans were really capable of when their protective instincts were fully engaged. Marcus found a secure hiding place for the cubs in a thick grove of silver-barked trees about 200 meters from the landing site. Using the same techniques that had created their shelter the night before, he quickly wove together a camouflaged nest where they could remain hidden. I need you all to stay here until I come back, he told them firmly. No matter what you hear, no matter what happens, don't leave this spot unless someone in a Terran uniform comes to get you. Pip stirred weakly in her makeshift bed of soft leaves. Her fever had worsened throughout the day, and Marcus could see that time was running out. Zeph and Nira pressed close to their littermate, their own fear evident in their wide eyes. What if you don't come back? Nira whispered. Marcus knelt down and gently touched the small cub's head. Then you wait until morning, and then you use the emergency beacon in my pack to call for help. But I will come back. I promise. With that, he disappeared into the darkness, moving through the alien forest with skills learned from years of survival training and refined by his recent days of navigating this particular terrain. Marcus spent nearly an hour studying the pirate camp before making his move. The raiders had grown careless in their success, posting only 2 guards while the rest celebrated their haul inside the captured survey ship. Their leader, a large reptilian creature with scales that gleamed like oil, was loudly bragging about the valuable equipment they would sell at black market stations. What the pirates hadn't noticed was that the human survey ship had been designed with security protocols they weren't familiar with. Marcus had helped design some of those protocols himself during his early years with the Corps. Every Terran vessel had hidden defensive capabilities that could be activated remotely if someone knew the right access codes. Moving carefully through the shadows, Marcus made his way to a maintenance panel on the exterior of his team's ship. His fingers found the hidden access port, and he quickly input the emergency sequence he had memorized years ago. The ship's systems would now be under his control, though the pirates inside wouldn't realize it for several minutes. The first sign of trouble came when the lights inside the ship began to flicker. Then, the artificial gravity fluctuated, causing several pirates to stumble and drop their stolen goods. The reptilian leader hissed orders, but his crew was already becoming agitated. Probably just an overloaded power coupling, one of them called out. These human ships are poorly designed. Marcus smiled grimly in the darkness. They would realize their mistakes soon enough. Phase 2 of his plan required getting closer to where his teammates were being held. The Terran prisoners were seated in a circle near one of the pirate vessels, guarded by two bored-looking sentries who were more interested in watching the looting than maintaining proper security. Marcus had fashioned several tools from materials gathered in the forest. Flexible vines became tripwires. Sharp stones became projectiles. Thick sap from certain trees became a substance that could blind or disorient attackers temporarily. He wasn't planning to kill anyone, but he needed to create enough chaos to accomplish his goals. The first guard never saw what hit him. Marcus's improvised sling launched a stone with surgical precision, striking the pirate in the head and dropping him unconscious. The second guard had just enough time to look confused before a vine noose, thrown with perfect accuracy, tightened around his ankles and sent him crashing to the ground. Marcus, Captain Rodriguez looked up with relief and amazement as Marcus emerged from the shadows. How did you get past their perimeter? Same way my ancestors got past saber-toothed tigers, Marcus replied as he cut through the energy bonds holding his teammates. Patience, planning, and a willingness to get creative. Dr. Sarah Kim, the team's xenobiologist, rubbed her freed wrists gratefully. We thought you were lost in the storm. How did you find us? Long story. Right now we have bigger problems. Marcus quickly explained about the Kytherian cubs and Pip's deteriorating condition. I need to get her to our medical bay, but these pirates are between us and proper treatment. There are 12 of them, Marcus, Lieutenant Torres pointed out, and they're heavily armed. 13 actually, but 2 are unconscious now, Marcus corrected with a slight grin. And being heavily armed doesn't help much when you don't know what you're fighting. As if to punctuate his words, shouts erupted from inside the survey ship as the pirates discovered that the environmental systems had begun cycling through random atmospheric compositions, making it difficult to breathe. Marcus's remote activation of the ship's defensive protocols was working exactly as designed. The thing about humans, Marcus continued as he led his team toward the grove where the cubs were hidden, is that we're really good at asymmetric warfare. These pirates are expecting to fight other pirates, or maybe military forces with similar equipment. They're not prepared for someone who thinks like a human. What followed was a masterclass in human ingenuity applied to tactical situations. Marcus had spent his time observing the pirates not just to learn their routines, but to understand the psychology of their operation. They were successful because they relied on superior firepower and intimidation. They had never faced an opponent who refused to engage on those terms. Instead of attacking directly, Marcus turned the forest itself into a weapon. Tripwires made from nearly invisible vine fibers sent pirates tumbling into carefully concealed pits lined with thick, sticky mud. Reflective surfaces improvised from polished stones created confusing light patterns that made it difficult to track movement in the darkness. Sound makers constructed from hollow gourds and pebbles created false audio signatures that sent search parties in wrong directions. But the psychological warfare was even more effective. Pirates who were used to terrifying others suddenly found themselves being stalked by an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't predict, and couldn't understand. Every shadow might hide a threat. Every sound might be a trap. Their confident swagger disappeared as paranoia took hold. What are we dealing with here? The reptilian leader snarled into his communicator as another of his crew members fell victim to one of Marcus's snares. Scan for life signs. Find whoever's doing this. But Marcus had learned how to mask his heat signature using mud and local vegetation, techniques passed down through generations of human warriors who had fought with nothing but their wits and whatever materials nature provided. The pirates' advanced scanners were designed to detect conventional threats, not a human who had temporarily become part of the forest ecosystem. The turning point came when Marcus managed to access the pirates' own ship systems. Unlike the heavily secured Terran vessel, the pirate craft had poor security protocols, probably because they had never expected someone to attempt such an approach. Within minutes, Marcus had taken control of their internal communications, their navigation systems, and, most importantly, their weapon targeting computers. Attention, pirates! Marcus's voice echoed through both their ship and the captured survey vessel. This is Marcus Chun of the Terran Survey Corps. You are now surrounded, and your ships are under my control. You have 30 seconds to release my crew members and surrender peacefully, or I will demonstrate why the galaxy should be more worried about human creativity than human aggression. The reptilian leader's response was predictably aggressive. One human? You think one human can threaten an entire pirate crew? We'll hunt you down, and his words were cut off as every light on both ships began strobing in a synchronized pattern that was specifically calibrated to induce disorientation in most known alien species. At the same time, the ship's speakers began broadcasting a combination of infrasonic and ultrasonic frequencies that created intense psychological unease. 15 seconds, Marcus announced calmly. What happened next became legend among both human and alien circles. The pirate crew, elite raiders who had terrorized shipping lanes across 3 sectors, surrendered to a single human armed with nothing but forest materials and an intimate understanding of jury-rigged technology. Within an hour, Pip was in the survey ship's medical bay receiving treatment for what turned out to be a severe allergic reaction to spores from a local plant species. Dr. Kim's quick intervention with antihistamines and respiratory support saved the little cub's life. Zeph and Nira stayed close to their littermate's bedside, but their eyes kept returning to Marcus with an expression that bordered on awe. I don't understand, Zeph said as Pip's breathing finally steadied. You could have just taken your people and left us. You could have avoided the pirates entirely. Why did you risk everything for 3 cubs you barely knew? Marcus looked down at the small Kytherian, who was finally sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. Because that's what humans do, Zeph. When we find family, we protect it. And you 3 became family the moment I found you scared and alone in those woods. The next day brought the arrival of both Terran rescue ships and Kytherian search vessels. The cubs' parents, frantic with worry since the accident, wept with joy as they were reunited with their children. The pirate crew was handed over to Galactic authorities, who were amazed to learn they had been defeated by a single human using improvised weapons and tactics. But the real story began to spread through galactic communication networks in the weeks that followed. 3 young Kytherians, members of a species that had been taught to fear and distrust humans, told anyone who would listen about the human who had risked everything to save them. They spoke of shelters woven from forest materials with techniques passed down through generations. They described river crossings where a human had repeatedly risked his life to ensure their safety. They told of creative tactics that turned the forest into an ally and technology into a tool for justice rather than oppression. Humans are not what the Hegemony Council says they are, Zeph announced to the Galactic News Network that interviewed him. They don't just fight for conquest. They fight for protection. They don't just destroy. They build. They built us a home when we had none. They built us hope when we were lost. Pip, fully recovered and energetic as any healthy cub, added her own perspective. Marcus smelled like family. Not like a stranger or an enemy. Like someone who would keep us safe no matter what. The interview became one of the most viewed broadcasts in galactic history. Public opinion began to shift as beings across the galaxy realized that perhaps the stories they had been told about humans were incomplete at best, deliberately misleading at worst. Marcus himself returned to his survey duties, but requests for his testimony began arriving from worlds throughout the sector. The Hegemony Council's narrative about human aggression was being challenged by a simple story of one man who had chosen to protect 3 lost children. Years later, when historians studied the period that led to humanity's full acceptance into galactic society, they would point to many factors: technological innovations, diplomatic breakthroughs, military alliances. But many would argue that it all really began in a forest on a remote world, where a human built a cradle from vines and bark, and 3 small cubs learned that family wasn't about species or origin. It was about who chose to stay when you needed them most. The cubs, now grown and successful in their own right, would often return to visit Marcus on Earth. They brought their own children, eager to meet the human who had become legendary in their family's history. And Marcus, graying but still strong, would tell those new cubs stories of their parents' bravery during those frightening days in the alien forest. Your parents were very brave, he would always say. They taught me that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about taking care of each other even when you are afraid. And in embassies and council chambers across the galaxy, the simple truth that Marcus had demonstrated became policy. The strongest societies are built not by conquering others, but by protecting the vulnerable and choosing to expand the definition of family beyond the boundaries of species, homeworld, or political alliance. Sometimes, the most important revolutions begin with the smallest acts of kindness. Sometimes, changing the galaxy is as simple as weaving together a shelter for those who need it most. And sometimes, being human means recognizing that family is not limited by biology, but expanded by choice, compassion, and the unshakable belief that everyone deserves to be protected when they are lost, afraid, and far from home.